Welcome on a Wednesday night to Generation
The
Movie, not Generation
ultimate
X, Y, or Z. Generation Movie. My name is J.W. Colwell. Welcome to our show tonight, joined as always by the estimable Rich Drees. Good evening, Rich. How you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. I'm still exhausted from New York Comic Con this past weekend, but I had a great time catching up with a lot of people, some of whom I hadn't seen in literally 3 years since before the pandemic because they couldn't come over from England last year. So it was good to see
so this
Joel.
is why we're a little late tonight. We're sorry about that. To everybody's paying attention. We got chit-chatting in the pre-show. If there's one takeaway from Comic-Con, because we're a show that covers particular movies, but something interesting that happened at Comic-Con. What's your one takeaway that you would drop on our show viewers tonight?
Wow.
Just one.
I was gonna say, if you haven't seen this trailer for season 3 of Picard, and you haven't even if you haven't been happy with the first 2 seasons, third season looks amazing from what they showed us. Especially
classic villains returning and stuff. Classic villains returning and the like is what everybody's chit-chatting about online.
Yes, 2 classic villains plus a new one played by Amanda Plummer.
Yeah, so it got a lot of buzz.
I was gonna say, in the brief moment, she looks like she's having the craziest fun time. So bless her heart for that, I guess.
Well, and all the original Next Generation crew is all coming back. A quick chat to everybody. Good evening, friends. Good evening, Ken, or should we say good evening? Good evening, friend. Joe chimes in. Good evening, gentlemen. My favorite Wednesday night show. Aw, Joe, thanks. I think we're your only Wednesday night show, though. But that's okay. I'll take the love. And then Ken chimes in with The Last American Virgin Story of My Teenage Years. Is it? Because we're gonna get into it. If it is, what do you say? Sorry. Like early in the movie, you're like, okay, great, that's your life, Ken. But if later in the movie this is your life, it's not. I'm sorry.
We'll talk about that.
Exactly. But we are excited tonight. We are doing a movie that if you've seen it, it becomes a part of you. If you haven't seen it, I'd really recommend it. Although at this time, you're going to need to buy a Blu-ray or a DVD or something because it is nowhere to be found in the streaming verse, and I don't know why that is. I'm sure there's a story behind it. Rights somewhere, maybe music rights.
Probably.
Because the soundtrack is so eclectic and easily the most defining characteristic aside from the script, right?
It's a great soundtrack, and it's
a fantastic soundtrack. They do everything in their power to make you feel like you're on the 80s. Like, I know I say that and you laugh, but it's literally as if you're on the 80s. Tonight we're doing the super fun and not as classic as it should be, Last American Virgin. It is a 1982 movie, a summer movie, and it is easy to get this movie lumped in with all of the 80s teen sex comedies, right, Rich? But
definitely.
It's special.
Yeah. There's gratuitous boobs and butts, and
there's an orgy or two. Lots of pizza talk, like pepperoni, sausage pizza. Like there's a pepperoni delivery sequence. There's straight out of like Porn 101, yada yada.
Yeah, there's some stuff that is definitely, yucking it up for the teen sex comedy laughs. But I think in the third act, the film really kind of shows you its heart and kind of really touches on some things that
put it in line, right?
With the exception of Fast Times, but like I said,
that's what I was going to say. It puts it in line with the more serious John Hughes work that we're going to get in 85, like The Breakfast Club.
Mm-hmm.
And it also puts it in line with Fast Times at Ridgemont High, that has raucous moments, but also has a very serious subplot. And we'll get to that in a moment. Some comments. Let's see. Rich looks brighter, more vibrant. New camera or lighting?
No.
He's been at
I think
Comic Con.
no.
He's been rejuvenated. He's been nerd rejuvenated.
Yes.
And
4 days.
And I've been gray since the hurricane. So I felt gray since the hurricane. No power. Maybe it's no power. But this movie, it's an interesting movie. It's something that's, and like I said, if you see it, if you ever see it, it becomes one of those movies that sticks with you. And it's kind of amazing in that regard. But some obligatory stuff we got to get out of the way. If you enjoy our show, this show is one of 5 shows that is on that are changing the way the Indie Escape Network works and changing the way podcasts work and indie people working together in a kind of a wonderful utopian conglomerate. And the Indie Escape Network has a YouTube channel where you can find all of our programs. And there's programs on every night of the week, and they're all really good with a bunch of amazing hosts who find either guests or interesting and fun stuff to talk to every week. And I'm just happy to be a part of it. We also have the Facebook page that you can get all of the information for the Indie Escape Network and, find everything you want to find. Joe Ridgely and everybody that works on the Indie Escape Network do such a great job of keeping the network going. And special events. We have a big special event coming up Thursday. We're going to talk about that later. And IOU, which is Brandon's show on Friday, has a major guest on Friday that the entire network is talking about after the network had Tom Holland on Sunday night with David at Madison at the end of the night. We're kind of having a Fright Night week. So William Ragsdale is going to be appearing on IOU on Friday. So a lot of fun, a lot of good things going on. But let's get to production on
this. And let's see if I just show up to pepper William Ragsdale with questions about Herman's Head.
Oh, Herman's Head.
I love that show, and I'm sorry.
It's a great show.
Yardley.
No, it's a great show, and actually, such a great show that goddamn Pixar stole the idea later.
True.
Let's talk about production. So this, first off, the interesting side note. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Okay, I was going to say, go ahead.
Oh, okay.
I want to hear your side note first.
Well, my side note is the most interesting thing is that Golden Globus Canon Productions is where this film starts out at, and it starts out as a 1978 Israeli film that was a foreign nominee for Best Picture. That was a foreign, it starts out as an Israeli, basically set in the 50s. It's called Eskimo Limon, which is lemon popsicle in Israel. And it starts out as this 78 Israeli film where it's, in the 50s, but Canon and Golden Globus attempt to take the success of the original. They move it to LA and set it in 1982. So urban, suburban LA. And then they bring in the 80s soundtrack and they buy every song they can imagine. And I think it's an interesting starting point that this starts off as a foreign adaptation. It's one of the first foreign adaptations that that I can remember.
Yeah, I do want to say, everybody remembers Canon Pictures from the 80s as like
Delta Force,
all the Chuck Norris movies, a lot of stuff like that, a lot of exploitation, a lot of action films, a lot of sex comedies. But it was founded back in like the late 60s as a kind of like an art house distributor, and then in about 1979, Yoram Globus and Menachem Golan, who were 2 Israeli filmmakers who had just come off of producing Lemon Popsicle and taking it around the world, where it was a hit in every country except the U.S. and they came to Hollywood to find their fortunes here in the big time, and they wound up buying Canon Film for like $500,000, and they basically turned around and turned it into like this big studio that was pretty big for its time through the 80s.
They were definitely making money. Like that,
Yeah.
they weren't making great movies, but they were making scratch. They knew where their bread was buttered, certainly.
Yeah, they did a lot of stuff. I'm just kind of glancing down a list of the Golden Globus area of Canon Film releasing. You've got stuff like a lot of stuff you probably saw in a video store too. Maybe not so much you saw this in the theater, but you saw it in the video store, which is I think where they made a lot of their money. You had stuff like Enter the Ninja, Death Wish 2, Revenge of the Ninja, the horrible Brooke Shields movie Sahara, Breakin' and Breakin' 2, Missing in Action.
Excuse me, how dare you leave off Electric Boogaloo?
Sorry.
How dare you, sir?
So sorry.
I said good day.
King Solomon's Mines, Aladdin, Runaway Train, which is a really good action film that was nominated for an Academy Award.
Probably their best movie, to be honest.
I would say yes. Then and Mars remake, all sorts of stuff, great stuff that they kept cranking out for us through the 80s. A very important seminal studio if you're looking at 80s cinema, because when you're looking at cinema, you have to kind of not just look at like the high quality stuff. You have to look at the exploitation stuff. You have to look at what failed. You have to look at what was popular but maybe wasn't so great. And that's kind of where Canon falls in most of the time. I love a lot of their stuff. And I'm just gonna throw this out here now. This book, it's the first of 3 volumes on the history of Canon films. That's right, 3-volume history on Canon films. By Austin Trunick. I will be referencing this book again later on because actually the next film that Canon released after this is a film we will be covering in December. But let you think about that as a tease.
It's a quality tease as well, my friend.
Thank you. And just the idea that they remade this film, bringing in the original director and writer, Boaz Davidson, to do it again. This time it was set originally in Israel and in the 1950s, and then they just kind of updated for SoCal, like JW was saying. And
I think it's an incredible story. Because I like we hear all the time now about American adaptations of foreign films. And like to a certain degree, a lot of the action films and everything that America is making is like, The Departed, or, I know they're working on an American version of The Raid, and then some of the Bollywood films that they're trying to like move over for us as well. So it's not unheard of now, but in the 80s, very unheard of for a movie to come for an American remake of something. You know what I mean? Where they,
I would say outside of like
the norm.
Battle Beyond the Stars being a science fiction remake of Seven Samurai, which is was already
certainly.
So.
Well, no, yeah, I mean, certainly some of the, Lucas, with The Hidden Fortress, and some of the 70s auteurs certainly had, they made their own movies, and they had movies they really loved, and understood. But for the most part,
I would say though that, in the 70s, you saw more TV being adapted from British formats. Things like All in the Family, Sanford and Son, Three's Company were all based on popular British series.
No, and that's practically perfect.
Yeah.
I think that about sums it up. But I think the main component for them here is they change it from 50s to 80s modern.
Mm-hmm.
And the most important component, aside from finding these actors, and the one key actor that they find, who becomes like a kind of a lightning rod because she stars in a couple of these movies where she is the apple of everyone's eye, right? Is Diane Franklin, right? Who's a great actress from the 80s movies. She was in Better Off Dead
Mm-hmm.
and this, and she just becomes like one of those it girls that you see in a bunch of movies and you just kind of you gravitate towards. But the soundtrack is what becomes the production calling card. Even so much so, like when you look at this poster we put up, right? The poster doesn't have the actors' names on it. Poster doesn't have. It barely has the director. Look at featuring top hits by Blondie, the Cars, the Commodores, Devo, Quincy Jones, Journey, the Police, REO Speedwagon, Tommy Two Tone, and U2. Look at how big the names are, and then look at how big the cast is down here, and the rest of the information about the film. So,
Now,
God,
okay, I'm wondering where how that marketing came about, emphasizing the soundtrack, because we had just a few months before Fast Times at Ridgemont High, which has a great soundtrack and that caught everybody's ear. And I'm wondering if Canon took a look at that and said, "Well, we've got a great soundtrack." They might have already had all that music in place. But they said, we need to emphasize this as well, because look how well it did for Fast Times at Ridgemont High. They might have been trying to replicate a little success there, even though this movie was actually shot in 1980 and sat on, and it took them almost 2 years. It took them 2 years to get it out into theaters.
yeah,
So,
and I think that, but I think the interesting thing is, they get all these rights, and one of the things that really screams out in the movie is the soundtrack. They
mm-hmm.
almost every single point in the movie there is a piece of soundtrack music that gets played with whatever the main characters are doing, and it's like the money's on the screen being heard. And I just found it fascinating. Like, I think this is one of the more provocative 80s posters as well, right? I mean, slipped off jeans and the fumblings in the front seats of cars is what happened in the 80s, right? And the idea that the main cast kind of like in the crotchal region of this poster, it's kind of an amazing poster. And then when
Mm-hmm.
you have no other cast, no characters above it, no, the tagline "See it or be it," it's one of those things where you look at it and you go, maybe it's just a schlock movie, and we're going to talk about it. It's not, right? And again, it has more in common with John Hughes and the Breakfast Club than it does with, say, a Porky's, or I'm more in touch with Fast Times at Ridgemont High than you know Zapped. You know what I mean? Like,
Wow, that's a cut.
that's
I
a
like
great
that.
reference, right? Okay,
Yeah.
that's why I'm here, Rich. But and I think that's what makes it really kind of unique and special. But the production, like, you can't really find. There's no stories where anything went wrong. This is one of those movies where nothing went wrong. They knew exactly what they were doing. They gave this guy, money to redo his film, Boaz Davidson. He wrote and directed the original. And the original even has it has Oscar cred. It was, foreign feature nominee,
Mm-hmm.
which is just incredible. And
And the original also had, was wall to wall music too, but it was all wall to wall 50s music,
50s
Chuck Berry,
goldies. Yeah,
all
golden
that stuff.
oldies.
And I read a statistic that basically for the original film they spent like a third of the budget on music, which to me is insane.
Well,
And
and
I've never had a chance to see Lemon Popsicle or any of the numerous sequels and stuff that have come out of that from Israel, and I would like to at some point. It's just tracking it down, I think. But especially after giving it a rewatch. Sorry, go ahead.
And and that's the thing. Like, there's a whole series of them. Let's see, it's lemon popsicle. It's oh my god, there's so many of them. Lemon popsicle, and seven official sequels have been made. Going Steady, Hot Bubblegum, Private Popsicle, Baby Love, Up Your Anchor, Young Love, and Summertime Blues. And then they even had a spin-off film, Private Maneuvers, also called Shaba. And then they did a reboot film called The Party Goes On, which was done in 2001, which took the main character from the Israeli roots of the original Lemon Popsicle all the way through to being a restaurant owner in 2001. So it's one of the more profitable franchises in Israeli film history. And they remake it as this 80s movie, and the production goes pretty smoothly. Like, because again, it is the director's baby. It is something where the director is making something he's already made, right?
And he based the original on his own experiences as a teenager too, in Tel Aviv.
Yeah, so it's kind of a weird thing. And in this summer of '82, as we've discussed on the show, it is a rough summer. It is a lot of competition. It's really funny. I mentioned Zapped. Zapped, by the way, outperformed this movie box office wise, which is terribly tragic and sad. But it did, and I can't believe I remembered Zapped came out in the exact same summer. Needless to say, we're not going to be doing a Zapped show.
No.
Because this movie is far more important than Zapped. But what I would also say is production goes quite smoothly. They line up the rights. They get the rights to, like, the soundtrack, Rich. And the soundtrack, and then you have fights over the soundtrack on various releases of the film. The Blu-ray release, the DVD release, the VHS release, all have different component and versions of the soundtrack. So you're looking Teen Angel Eyes by Tommy Two-Tone, The Police, you have Whip It by Devo, you have Better Luck Next Time by Oingo Boingo, you have Are You Ready for the Sex Girls by Gleaming Spires, Since You're Gone, The Cars, I Will Follow by U2, you know what I mean? There is not...
Gotta throw some love for the Waitresses. I love that band.
Yes. I know what boys like. But they did have a lot of fighting about soundtracks. The Japanese release had different things. The DVD releases had different. Love Action is actually taken out and Whip It is replaced. Although the original VHS MGM release has the original song concepts. So that's the most incredulous thing you can find with regards to production. They don't fight about anything. Again, they find an it girl, Diane Franklin, who, during production has issues with the nudity, but plows through.
Well, she knew. She has said it was, she understood it was written into her contract.
Yeah, and I love what she wrote. Like, she did write about it. She talked about it in an interview in 2017. At the time when I did it, I thought, my gosh, I'm doing this film, and as an actress, is the nudity going to affect my career? I didn't personally have a lot of problems doing it for myself, but I was nervous. I was 19. I had never done something like this before. At the same time, because I had started in the business so young, I was prepared emotionally. I knew what I was doing. And that's the thing. Like, one of the great things about this movie is the honesty of the movie shines through. And, it plays off when you're talking about the production. There's not a lot of fighting about it. I mean, some of these movies we go through have a ton of fighting, a ton of issues, but this is not one of them. Which brings us to How did it do, Rich? And the answer is meh.
Not good.
Yeah, the answer is meh. So it opens on, let's see, gotta go.
June. Oh, excuse me,
No,
July 3rd.
July 30th. Yeah, actually, I have it as. Hold on, is it July 30th?
Mm-hmm.
It could be. I have it as August 4th in America.
Okay, maybe July
August
30th. The date I'm looking at was a premiere party.
it could be. Um, Opens on August 4th. It is not on a ton of screens. It grosses in total for its entire run $5.8 million. The adjusted gross is about 18 million. When you look at it, it doesn't do great. And the thing is, at the time it comes out, Rich, and this is where I was looking at it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's teen and smarmy comedy. Like I think there's Burnout, right? Because like this hits on the heels of Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. It hits on the heels of Zapped. It hits on the heels of Things Are Tough All Over, Night Shift, right? All these
Mm-hmm.
R-rated comedies start getting dropped in the middle of the summer. Young Doctors in Love
We
and
had Fast Times early on
Fast,
in the summer.
Fast Times early. So you have all these R-rated comedies that get dropped in the middle of July, right? And when did Fast Times come out? Fast Times was
Oh, jeepers.
actually Fast Times comes out 2 weeks later. But even Fast Times doesn't gross what you would think Fast Times grossed.
No.
Only 27 million. But I think
And this
there's
is just
fatigue.
Porky's grossed over 100 million. So yeah, I could see where 6 million, where you're trying to make some, dent into the Porky's market, might be disappointing.
When I just think there's a lot of fatigue. There's 5 R-rated comedies between July 23rd and August 4th. Things Are Tough All Over, Night Shift, Zapped, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas, Young Doctors in Love. It's it's way too much. Like R-rated comedies, we can't even get an R-rated comedy now, right? I mean, the last one that did what was Good Boys did very well, and we haven't had a big R-rated comedy since. So
No.
it's when you release all of them in a giant kind of like container that's a 4 week like span, it becomes a problem. Oh,
Mm-hmm.
wait, hold on. What else we got here? This was Lawrence Monsoon's Gary first movie. Yes, it was. And he's the casting is particularly good. I will say that. Everybody that's in the movie is working really hard. There's not a a person that's not playing things well. Rick, the bad guy, will show up one other time as a bad guy that I can remember on screen. He shows up one other time in box office history as a complete d bag. Um, so I mean, Gary doesn't really. Uh, the person playing Gary, Lawrence Monoson, as we call him, he he does other things, but he doesn't like. This is he gets killed in a Friday the 13th movie. Um, he's in Mask. He doesn't really do. He doesn't. He has a decent amount of films. He was on
Mm-hmm.
Deep Space Nine. A couple episodes of Murder She Wrote. Rest in peace, Angela Lansbury.
Yes.
Um, but so he
Let's
hasn't.
not overlook Amy Robertson either. I mean, she obviously went on to be Lucy on Twin Peaks, probably her most iconic role, and one of those roles that when people think about Twin Peaks, they remember that character. She's just so amazing in that.
Yeah, well, I think the actors are really good in this movie. part of what sets it apart from, I mean, you can't compare it to something like Breakfast Club or Fast Times at Ridgemont High because everybody in those two movies, almost every single one of those people went on to do other things, right? But this movie has a quirk in that the kids, the actors that were chosen, and the box office, even though it doesn't have a box office star in it, the actors are convincing and they're all kind of like they're real. I think that's the best thing I can say about it. Is part of the charm of the movie is that they seem like real kids. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
even when they're being played by 19-year-olds and
well,
20-year-olds.
I think that they're as close to, that 16, 17, 18-year-old age range that we're supposed to assume that these characters are, as opposed to, actors being in like their early 20s playing that. There's just enough of a gap in like something like when you look at some of the actors, even in stuff like Better Off Dead, where it's like these folks look a little too old to be playing high schoolers.
Well, at least
I call it sweat hog syndrome after Welcome Back, Kotter, where all the sweat hogs are, these high school students were all being played by like 35-year-old actors.
mid-30s.
Yeah.
But the box office isn't great, but it does become one of those movies that, and part of its legacy, which we'll talk about, but it does become one of those movies that gets rented and shown and is shown on HBO and is like the box office is one piece of the story here. And that's the other thing. I think the interesting thing that we're going to get to in the legacy is that if you know somebody that's seen it, Ken's dropping the dime on me. Yeah, he was Troy in the Goonies. It's exactly right. We know what he did. We know what he did in this movie, so we don't want him anywhere near Andy. That's what I'm saying. But like I was saying, like the box office is one piece of the story here. The legacy of the movie, and I think it's one of the things we'll talk about soon, is that if you've seen it, most people who've seen it love it, and most people who've seen it like revere its third act, right?
Mm-hmm.
And speaking of revering, I will say, critical response is pretty amazing, actually. It is one of the rare teen comedies that if you look at a aggregate site like Rotten Tomatoes, we're looking at 77% for a raunchy teen comedy. Fairly high. And, it definitely has its detractors because it is not a clean movie at all.
Mm-hmm.
But 77 is high. Audience scores at 65, so there is love if you can find it. Although, again, much harder right now for whatever reason. Because again, it's part of the MGM catalog, and we don't know. Maybe coming to Amazon soon as part of the huge deal they just did. But it's the reviews are all interesting in that the film has a dichotomy. First half is a raunchy teen comedy. Last third act kind of like becomes this really kind of I want to say morally relative kind of look at teens and how they deal with consequences of their actions. It becomes this incredible morality tale
Mm-hmm.
and morality plan.
This is definitely where the movie, kicks. It kind of starts paying off consequences of its setup. Basically, our hero is basically longing for this girl. He's in love with her. He's just, smitten with her, and she is, in a relationship with his douchey best friend, who he knows is a bit of a douchebag. because when he's not with her, the two
He's
of
with
them in
other
a
women, yeah. Well, and
running
he's.
around doing all sorts of
I would
hijinks.
say that he's not a bad friend either. He's always like the one thing about Rick. So the characters are Rick, David, and Gary. David is traditional, fun, chubby guy movie role, right? Which I love.
Yeah,
David's one of my favorite chubby guy characters. Love him. Rick is the stylish, talking to girls, you know, decent looking guy that most of us hung out with, had a friend that was, good looking and could talk to girls. Gary's in the middle. Gary's a decent looking kid, but he's not as great talking as Rick. Doesn't live in the same skin that David lives in, right? And what I think is really interesting is they're never really bad friends. And actually, I think David has one of my favorite sequences in the movie where somebody says something mean to Gary and he punches him in the face, punches the person dead in the face. And I'm like, that was me as a teenager. If you fucked around with my friends, you found out. You know
oh
what I mean?
yeah,
And it's so there's something where you're watching it where you start seeing there's an everyman quality to it with whatever characters you're looking at. And so it's this wonderful. It's a team comedy that has a basic team comedy setups, like "Ooh, I saw a boob," or "Ooh, I'm trying to see a boob," or "Oh, I hope to see a boob," and then, "Oh my God, there's a slutty woman that we're delivering pizza to, and maybe we can get lucky if her husband doesn't come home." Kind of like ridiculous shit that everybody wants to be part of when you're a teenager, unless you know the consequences of getting hit by that husband coming home, right? And finding the girl that you become smitten with just by watching her eat an ice cream cone, which is again a male gaze kind of white guy, survival instinct, suburban setting kind of thing. And it's but the third act, Rich, is so damn bleak and just amazingly um dark for an 80s teen comedy.
I
And
guess I'm not sure I would call it dark so much, but I like how it resonates. It doesn't go for a very pat happy ending, and I appreciate that because maybe I was smitten with a girl or two in high school who was dating jerks, um, and it never worked out. And
Ken
I
Ken told me
really
it's on YouTube. It's on YouTube. And Ken also
okay.
said third act turns dramatically dark. I think that's one of the great things about the movie is I think if it's one of those movies you've never seen it, first hour and a half is exactly what you think it's going to be with a movie called The Last American Virgin. Last half hour has a chance to punch you in the face. And the thing about it is where it and we may have to talk about this a little bit in Legacy in a moment, but it where it the third act is where it gets every bit of the cult standing. It kind of resonates, right? You said
Rightfully
resonate,
earned
great thing.
status.
The third act is where it gets all of its like you and I watch a lot of movies, right? And when you're watching a movie and you're like, you can kind of figure out, I know what's going to happen here. I can figure out. And then it's a rare movie that you and I sit down to and go, wow, that completely did not see that shit coming. Like, you know what I mean? Where you're sitting with friends and you're watching a movie
Yeah.
and you're talking to yourself in your head. I know you do the same thing I do, where you're talking to yourself in your head, going, well, this is okay. That happened over there. That was that. Script dangle is for this. This is going to be that, right? And the
Yeah.
people you go to movies with sometimes look at you like, God, I hate you. Why can't you just watch a movie? You're like, no, I've already figured it out. And
Would have broken people this way.
yes, oh my God, so many people hate us. But what I would say is this movie is one of the movies where pleasantly happy and wonderful surprise that the teen comedy where the geeky kid falls in love with the beautiful girl, and and not ruining it, just nothing. He gets nothing at the end, and he comes out of this love affair with this girl that's unattainable,
Mm-hmm.
worse than when he came into it, and he doesn't actually get anything out of it. Like if you watch like a comedy like Revenge of the Nerds, right? The end of Revenge of the Nerds is one of the most unrealistic things ever, right? And also is a little date rapey now, and it's also
Oh,
a lot date rapey. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to put it that succinctly and subtly. A lot date rapey now, and also unrealistic, right? There is
mm-hmm.
no way that Betty ends up with Lewis in the real world, and actually, there's a very good chance that Lewis is going to jail. Um, and so this movie, the third act is a series of consequences and somebody stepping up to be a good person. Like I
Mm-hmm.
think Gary comes out of this movie as the best person, but he's also the most naive person in the film. And but the response is always when you look at the critics all come up with um the words that you hear are a barely tolerable, raunchy, formulaic teen comedy that turns unfashionably serious with a realistic downbeat ending. Thumbs up. You know what I mean? Like those are the reviews.
Mhm.
The
And
reviews
I'd say that's fair. I'd say that's fair because some of the shtick in the first two parts of this film, the first two acts,
it's all
I'm
about
kind of
getting
like,
laid.
it just feels contrived a little bit. It's like, oh, nymphomaniac woman getting the pizza. He goes gets his friends, and now obviously, of course, this is the moment that the boyfriend's going to come back home from being away in the merchant marine. You know, if you were
It's
mocking,
ridiculous.
if you were
It
looking
is.
to mock a
I
sex
have.
comedy,
I was.
sex,
I've always wondering. I was always wondering about this. The pizza aspect of the film. Was there a porno pizza film first, and this copied it, or do you think this movie, like as part of the legacy we're going to talk about in a moment, created that because I this is 82, right?
yeah. So we're past the porn chic era, which was like late 70s. So I dare say there was probably some kind of porn
Something.
with a
That
pizza delivery scene.
pizza
Oh,
delivery.
pepperoni flap.
Pizza. I ordered extra sausage. Okay. But that's one of the more interesting things about it is formulaic. It is, they all have the date with the three girls, or one of the girls isn't into it, but Gary's trying real hard. She's not interested. You know what I mean? Like
That was kind of cringy too.
it's a
That
little
she's
cringy
there eating and he's like unbuttoning her shirt.
and bra, and he's not
Yeah,
good at it.
no.
Um,
Uh,
but the cringy is all put to the side once you get to the third act. The third act. So without giving too much, like I mean, I feel like we should. It's 40 years old. We can talk about this. Third act is Rick. Karen is the object of Gary's affection. Rick knows this. Rick has the power to sleep with any girl he wants to. He sleeps with Karen. Gary's devastated, but understands. And basically, Gary and Rick have a fight about it. Karen ends up pregnant, right?
mhm.
And Rick becomes the big D bag, right? In the sense that he just doesn't care. But Gary still cares about Karen. So Gary borrows money from work, sells his valuable possessions like stereo and stuff baubles he has, and helps her pay for the abortion. So this is our second 82 movie with abortion, which I guess also makes them incredibly timely in the era we live in right now, 40 years later, right? Because these are
Unfortunately.
two movies that take the abortion sequences very seriously. And you're looking at he pays for it. He takes her to his grandmother's cottage. He nurses her back to health. They share a momentary fling, a very passionate kiss, and Gary
Mm-hmm.
thinks everything's okay. He takes the last of his savings. I think doesn't he cut grass or whatever? And he takes the last of his savings. He buys her a gold locket for her birthday, which is perfectly timed to the end towards the end of the movie. He goes to the party to see her. He looks across the party, and Karen is back with Rick, who's kissing her passionately. And they stop kissing. They see Gary, and the movie ends with Gary leaving the party in tears,
Mm-hmm.
realizing that life has crushed his hopes and dreams.
The moment where he's standing in the doorway and they hold on him as he's processing everything, and she's they've Rick and Karen have broken their kiss, and they're both looking at him, and they just hold on Gary's face there, and they hold on that face, and they hold on that. It's an amazing shot, and it's an amazing bit of performance where he's barely doing anything, but it's so much, and you just feel everything going on in his heart and in his head, and how it's all just exploding.
It's an amazing scene.
It's an amazing moment,
It's an
and
incredible film moment, and also it is like, this equates to something funny. There's a Simpsons episode where Ralphie Wiggum asks Lisa to a dance or to a concert, and Lisa goes to the concert and agrees to go to the concert with Ralph Wiggum because she wants to see the person that's performing.
mm-hmm.
And there's a sequence where he goes to hold her hand, and she pulls her hand away, and Bart videotapes it. And there's a moment where he goes, and this moment, Lisa, is where you can see you're breaking his heart. And Ralphie Wiggum is just like, the hand gets pulled back, and and that's what Gary goes through. Gary gets absolutely eviscerated. Also, has any final girl ever looked worse? Has any object of affection girl ever looked more terrible than Karen in The Last American Virgin? Rich, I ask you, I beg of you, help me
in
on
that
this
moment,
one.
in that moment, yeah, she
Well,
looks awful person.
No, she's terrible. And you wonder, you can have a whole long debate on whether Rick said, if you go to Gary, he'll pay for everything. That's what happens, and we'll talk about this now, because we can jump to this. Hold on.
But I was gonna
Einstein
say,
is the killer, could actually feel him breaking inside. Yeah.
But for me though, just Diane Franklin is always will be just one of those cinema crushes, because
Yes, that's right, because she's not perfect. There's something about her that's so I would say that the legacy of this film, if you ever see this film, if you choose to watch this film, the legacy of the film is that it starts out one way and completely changes what it is. It becomes this very kind of like, and especially in an age of COVID, and in the age of the Great Resignation, and in the age of finding mental health and doing all these things, getting toxic people out of your life. Rick is toxic. Karen is toxic before toxic was toxic, right? And I think the legacy of this movie is it's something you can share. I was reading some of the IMDb reviews, and one guy had written, "I saw this movie at a friend's house at a sleepover when I was 14 years old, and we were so excited for the first hour and a half. And then we didn't know how to process the last 20 minutes of the movie." Right? And he goes, and then about, it's 40 years old now. I'm older. I'm in my mid 40s. I now understand the movie, everything that happened to Gary, right? But I needed all those years to catch up. Like, this movie is ahead of its time with regards to toxicity, mental health, um, the idea of trustworthy friends. You know what I mean? Like, just it's ahead of its time. And I think for most of us, the reason we enjoy it, the reason you talk about it, the reason you bring it up legacy wise, is because it's unlike anything you've ever seen. Like The Breakfast Club is dark, has its dark moments, and they all end up as friends at the end. And you do get the idea that they will pass each other in the hall and not do horrible things to one another, right?
You hope, but
You hope, but the hope is there. This movie takes that hope away, Rich.
I
That
know.
hope is gone. Is gone. Because
I
like you
know.
can never.
Honestly, as somebody who, I think it definitely divides people. And I think for me, the reason I like it is I, like a lot of people in high school, had their hearts stomped on more than once. That's just the nature of being a teenager and, in part, a victim of your own hormones. So, when I watch that, I see, I go, okay, it wasn't just me that this kind of thing happened to. I can relate to that moment. It feels very true and honest to the situation. It's not a happy ending, which is strange because Diane Franklin goes on to star in one of the great teen rom-com happy endings in Better Off Dead, I think. But
Yes, Dodger Stadium. They end up
yes,
at the end at Dodger Stadium. Also has one of the greatest. That Better Off Dead movie has one of the greatest confusions ever. He put his how you say testicles all over me. Testicles.
tentacle.
He put how you say octopus tentacles. Tentacles. Totally different thing. But yeah, I mean, so she ends up in one of the greatest
hmm and
cliched endings.
and she sells both of them perfectly. For this being her first movie here in Last American Virgin, and just a few years later, that she's able to do such emotionally tough work to make both those vastly different endings work. Is a testament, I think, to the
I think
actress.
she's a lot of people our age, our screen crushes. I think she's one of those actresses that you have like you have 10 friends that know about it, and you have 10 friends that go, oh, Last American Virgin, oh, Better Off Dead, oh, Diane Franklin, oh, and then
No.
everybody else is like they don't know what the fuck you're talking about because they were working on other like Molly Ringwald and all the other people from the 80s that I didn't gravitate towards, but Diane Franklin was one of them. I was always an Annabeth Gish person too. Speaking of crushes, Quality Crush, Mystic Pizza, Quality Crush.
Okay.
Plenty of reasons to watch Mystic Pizza, not named Julia Roberts. But the thing here, the legacy of this movie, first off, franchise viability, you have to talk about the foreign version.
Yeah.
Anytime you have 7 versions, 7 sequels in a franchise, and you followed it all the way up to a reboot in 2001, that's impressive. And the original filmmaker has been involved with all of them. This doesn't get any kind of franchise viability, but the legacy of it is
But,
how many of the people have seen this movie have
mhm.
tried to put it into their work. When you watch something like My So-Called Life, or you watch something like things that hit during the 90s and 2000s, how many of those creators that saw this movie do we think there are? Because it is a cult specific genre film that the whole basis of the cult is that the ending is so dark. It's like the Empire Strikes Back of raunchy kids movies. It's
That's
like the Star Trek, the Wrath of Khan of Porky's films.
um,
Just dark.
but in terms of franchise viability, though, Golan and Globus were definitely thinking that if this version of Lemon Popsicle were to succeed, they could follow the same template and do sequels. Like the 3 male leads were all signed with a sequel option for at least 3 films. Diane Franklin has said she wasn't, though. So
That's an interesting thing, but
that is,
also
and
the 5.8 million breaks it, and then also the way the film ends breaks it. And Ken brings up a really interesting thing here. Do you think this movie made it that Gary Carter might have gone suicidal? Sure. I think
he could be suicidal when we see him driving off. I mean, he could be
he's
thinking
suicidal in that version. Like when you Ken,
he,
when you
he,
ask me like if they made it today,
he could
I think
drive
he's
into the garage, keep the motor running, and close the door. And 10
yeah,
minutes
I
after
think he's suicidal in the original. Like you want to talk about he's suicidal from the get-go. Like I don't think there's I think the tears and the locket and just you know I think he's broken, because he can't go back to his friends. Like, how can you ever go into a room or go to a diner and hang out with Rick ever again unless, again, you could write a sequel sequence where you go, I just need the money back, man.
mm-hmm. Well,
It was
the
your
sequel
shit. I cleaned up your stuff.
allegedly the sequel that they were initially thinking about before the box office receipts kind of put a kibosh on that was putting the three guys on a boat on a cruise ship somewhere and hilarity ensuing.
Yeah,
But
but how can that's interesting. I would love to see this. I'd love to see David and Gary on the boat. But Rick, I don't know. I don't know anybody who's not a Rick. I don't know how anybody who's not a Rick goes. Rick's ever allowed to hang out with them again.
exactly.
Why would I hang out with that guy ever again? Because he's gonna go after whatever girl I like. Also,
Mm-hmm.
he's gonna get me to pay for her abortion that he caused. Like Gary and Rick can never hang out again.
I don't think they can be friends until they're at least 35.
Well, yeah, and then they go out for a beer and they're like, "Hey, I bought you season tickets to something. I'm sorry, I was a d bag with that Karen thing. Also, by the way, she was a terrible person. She cheated on me several times in college. Something that makes Gary go okay.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean the franchise viability. I would have loved to see sequels. I would have gone back. Um, I also think you would have had the sequel would have had to have a dark opening, right?
Mm-hmm.
David talking Gary off the bridge, kind of thing. And David could do it. I mean, the kid playing David for chubby guys in film. He is fantastic. His name is Joe Rubbo. That's a great fat guy actor name. His name's Joe Rubbo. He plays David. David is hilarious. David is gregarious. He's funny. Wears shades into parties and stuff. Like everything I wanted to be as a teenage fat guy. He is. And he's funny as hell. Constantly, dropping jokes.
Let me ask
But
you this. Let me ask you
sure.
this. Do you think Karen actually does care for Gary, but she, in her own way, had some wild oats she's looking to sow, and she knows that she can't do that if she's with Gary because maybe his devotion to her scares her a little bit. She doesn't know how to process that or how to work with that.
I
And do you think she kind of just like says, "Okay, I'm gonna have to push him away. It's gonna suck." But ultimately, maybe 5 years from
I'm not
now,
ready. I'm not ready for that relationship right now.
yeah,
Um, Maybe I've always taken. This is gonna sound horrible. I've always taken the much darker take on it.
that she was just using him.
No, no, that Rick talked her into it.
Oh, that Rick talk. Okay,
That Rick basically said to her, "If I don't have the money, I'm not gonna pay for this." Right? I feel bad. I'm sorry. I think we can get Gary to pay for it. I've
I think
always
that's a
taken a.
little Machiavellian for what else is going on in the movie.
It
You might
might
be
be.
giving the characters way too much credit here. I think.
I just think there is something about that final scene where they both. It's a it's like a winner's circle. Gary's headed to the party. They're already kissing at the party. David knows what's already happened. Do you know what I mean? It's like a victory lap.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I like yours better because it's more human, but mine is much more cynical because
Well, yes.
I feel at our core we're evil beasties. Like, and maybe at some point I could have seen it your way, but as I progress through life, I can't see it any other way than
Florida
you.
broke you, man. You got to get out of there.
Well, no, it is what it is. It wasn't Florida. I was already acerbic about life anyway. But
Mm-hmm.
the idea that sequence is so because you're giving her a lot of emotional maturity,
Mm-hmm.
and I think going like having somebody pay for all your shit, take care of you, nurse you back to health, and then to leave, go into a party and start kissing on the guy that didn't pay for it or nurse you back to health. That's not that's not me being emotionally mature pushing the needy guy away. That's me, you know. I don't know. I've always viewed it as a using. I've also always viewed it as like I felt Rick is the silver tongued devil. The idea every one of us has a friend that is so good with women where you go, how, why, and you look at them and you're just like, why would you do that? And then the response is always because I can.
Mm.
Everybody has one in their life.
Mm-hmm.
Some of us have more than one because I'm a chubby guy that's funny. So I have more than one of these people. But I have so many people in my life that get away with stuff. And you're just like looking at it going, first off, how would you do that? Secondly, why would you do that? And then you watch Rick and it's like Gary takes out a loan from his employer. Do you know what I mean? Like the idea that the movie doesn't end with Gary punching Rick, that it ends with Gary leaving with the dependent and crying into the camera and then credits. I just it has to be darker than Karen going, "Oh, it's just too much for me. I need about 3 years and I'll realize what a great guy is." That's just how I feel, Rich. It's
Okay.
dark. And again, I think with the way Rick acts throughout the movie, there is some semblance to my theory
Okay.
because he kind of puts off responsibility for a lot of things in the movie.
Oh, that's true. Yes.
And David is constantly keeping Gary and Rick together by going, "Hey, we're friends, assholes. We're friends." Right? And David's always fixing things. Gary's always doing the right thing. Rick's always fucking up, going, "I'm sorry." And then, I think it's a much darker thing where I think we get him to pay for everything. And maybe that's a darker reboot we could do.
Yeah, I'm the more I think about this, I'm kind of bummed that it didn't make more money because I'm interested in seeing what
A
kind of
sequel.
storytelling uh, uh, things they would have had to do to get these kids to hang out for a second movie together. What
Yeah,
kind
they
of
would have had the first act of the second movie would have had to be a drastic come to Jesus moment for Rick, right? A drastic reading of the riot act on what our friendship is between Gary and Rick. And David may be in the middle going, "I like both of you guys." And I think one of the things about the legacy, um, you got a lot of things like the AV Club, and you have a lot of things like there's an essay out there that's floating around from Andy Selzberg. Last American Virgin was the only truthful enough to have a main character left longing for the dream girl, where all the other 80s sex comedies are acheless.
mm-hmm.
Pee Wee gets Wendy, Lewis gets Betty, but Gary gets Zip. He gets crying. That's the legacy. The legacy is this magic moment where this magic movie where you hurt more than you ever thought you were going to with a bunch of guys trying to get laid. And I think that's a great legacy. It's a great, perfect kind of end to our raunchy summer films with regards to teen comedies. We have a raunchy summer film coming up next week.
Let me ask you this then too. Again, on the sequel idea here.
Wait a second. Somebody agrees with me. Hold on. We have agreement. Karen's look at the end. She looked proud, and Rick had a smirk. They conned him. Ooh. And then CJ said, "Way to lay the facts, JW." Thank you, CJ. But I think it is open to interpretation. I like Rich's interpretation. Rich, for all intents and purposes, is a much more jolly fellow than I am. With like Rich is a happier cat than I am. But what were we gonna say?
In a sequel, do you break Gary's heart at the end again? Do you break somebody else's heart at the end? Or do you
the sequel? No. The sequel has to be they get back together. They're gonna do like the American Pie 2 thing. They're gonna rent a house, or they're gonna go on a cruise ship. The sequel has to end with Rick getting rejected by the pretty girl, and the pretty girl picking not Karen, the pretty girl picking Gary, right? I mean, that is how it would have to go. The sequel has to end with Rick getting some sort of, in a wrestling kind of thing, a comeuppance for being a heel, right? So the sequel has to be like they're on a cruise ship. They're both interested in, let's say, the aquatic director. Let's say a lifeguard, right? And they're both, she's gorgeous. She's, from Sweden, whatever you want to do, right? Because we're kind of writing it as we go right now. And she sees Gary for being a really great guy, and she sees Rick for the conniving
SOB
son of a bitch that he is. And Rick thinks he's got one over on her, but at the end he's left with nothing. And Gary is, you see them in the cruise ship, and they're, and that's where Gary loses his virginity. Right? I mean, that would be or, you go super dark. You maybe do a Stifler's mom for Rick. You give Rick a Stifler's mom where, Gary hooks up with Rick's mom. Something has to right the equation.
Okay.
I think that has to be. Ken lays the smackdown as well. I think Gary has to break her. I think that's too dark, and also I don't want Gary anywhere near her ever again. I don't want Gary anywhere near her because she's this choice at the end of this movie. The legacy of this choice is that she is not the character we thought she was. Right? This choice to kiss Rick at a party that Gary is coming to with a birthday gift for you, after he has nursed you back to health at his grandmother's house and used all of his money to pay for your abortion and to take care of you, and you shared a passionate kiss with him. She is not who we want her. I don't want Gary anywhere near her. I want Gary to find his actual attainable girl, his actual dream girl. That's just how I feel about it. Like, it's funny though. You're right. The dichotomy of it is Diane Franklin has played Karen, and she's the French girl from Better Off Dead. She's played both sides of it perfectly. And actually, maybe it ties a little bit into Legacy as well, because you have this character that's a bit of a femme fatale in this movie, and she becomes the sweet all-American, the sweet French girl that everybody's attracted to, and John Cusack has fallen in love with, who John Cusack picks over the girl that isn't perfect for him.
Yes.
So she's flipped her coin. So that's part of the legacy of this movie, is that
Oh
it is
yeah.
a great companion piece. You know, the Mahoning Drive-In in Pennsylvania does a lot of double features. A great double feature would be The Last American Virgin and Better Off Dead.
Wow. Yeah, you're
The
absolutely
du-
right.
the dueling Diane Franklins.
Virgil, the programmer at Mahoning, if you're watching tonight,
That's
some
that's one that's one that we'd be sponsored by Generation Movie. The Last American Virgin and Better Off Dead. The two faces of Diane Franklin's Eve. But yeah, I mean that's absolutely a perfect way to end the show. Um,
yeah.
so a couple things. We got a couple programming notes coming up. I have two of them. First one. Oh, let me get rid of franchise viability. Hold on. Let me get rid of my banner. This Thursday night, the Indie Escape Network presents Rock and Roll Nightmare Cast and Crew Q&A. Tim Elkin back again, Thursday, October 13th, 10 p.m. I am hearing in all of the chats that he has 8, 9, or 10 members of the cast that are going to be involved in this Rock and Roll Nightmare Q&A. And Tim is the king of these huge Q&As with these great 80s and 90s films. So best of luck to Tim. I hope he has a great night. That's on Thursday at 10 o'clock on the Indie Escape Network. And then also coming up this week, and this is a big one, our good buddy Brandon Brooks on Friday, October 14th, 10 p.m., William Ragsdale, he of the Charlie fame, Friday Night 1 and 2, Mannequin on the Move, Herman's Head, so much more. William Ragsdale, one of the great 80s everymans, coming up with Brandon. I'm sure it's going to be a great show. Brandon always pulls out all the stops for these guests. Always a fascinating take. And where can people find you, my friends? I
Well,
ask the question every week. It's not that hard.
I know. And every week I do something
Everybody's
different.
like,
Okay, all of my writing can be found at filmbuffonline.com, including, as I'm hopefully going to finish rolling it out this week, some of the roundtables and interviews I did during New York Comic Con this past weekend.
who did you do interviews with? Anybody we know?
Oh, I checked the bucket list item off. I participated in an interview with one of the main Muppet performers.
Amazing. That
Bill
is perfect.
Bill Beretta, who created Pepe Le Prawn and is now the main performer for Rolf, the Swedish Chef, and of course Dr. Teeth. This was in conjunction with the upcoming Disney Plus series Muppet Mayhem, which follows Dr. Teeth and the Electric Mayhem as they start to record their first album, and all sorts of comedy and hijinks that
Can only be found in Muppet Land.
Yes. Also, my podcast with my co-host, Natasha Bogutsky, the Big Picture Podcast, can be found at bigpicturepod.com, which also just links back to Film Buff Online. And I'm on Twitter at Film Buff Rich.
I am online at JW the Movie Guy on Facebook, the Movie Guy on Twitter. Every week you get it wrong. It's amazing. Every week you just find new and exciting ways to butcher. It's amazing. You throw me off because I'm like, I'm ready for mine, and then all of a sudden I'm like, am I? Do I know mine? I don't. So let's see. On the Facebook, the Movie Guy. So I have my own Facebook Movie Guy page. Also, we have a great group called Loud and Nerdy the Group. By all means, join it. I know our good friend Ken McKernan, who pays attention every Wednesday night to us. We appreciate him. He has joined the Film Buff, the Loud and Nerdy group on Facebook, and is having a blast hanging out with all the folks that cause all kinds of trouble and do all kinds of polls. I do Loud and Nerdy on Wednesday nights before this show at 8 o'clock. And we have all kinds of good things going on. Twitter, JW the Movie Guy. Facebook, JW the Movie Guy, and also Loud and Nerdy. We enjoy everything about doing this show on this network with everybody involved. And next week, one of my all-time favorite musicals. I do like musicals because musicals and action films go hand in hand.
Before we tease next week, while we're praising our fellow cohorts here at Indie Escape, I want to throw some love out to our graphics designer who gives us the graphic each week that JW and I throw online to
Yes.
let you know about the show.
Yeah, that
It
Joe Ridgely is amazing.
oh
He doesn't.
yes.
He's like a proud Papa Bear that keeps everybody moving and going in the right direction, trying to find salmon down the river. And he gives us really nice slicks. He kicks it up a bit. He kicks it up for everybody though. He's an
Mhm.
incredible person to work with and work on shows and properties with. And we have a big show coming up next week. One of the coolest and most popular hits in 1982, The Best Little Whorehouse in Texas. One of the cool pairings, and one of the pairings that didn't occur more than it didn't occur enough, because Parton and Burt Reynolds have a lot of chemistry in this movie. It's going to be a great talk. Of course, Dom DeLuise is in it. Jim Nabors is in it. It's got some great musical dance numbers. It is a fun movie musical. It's a little dirty, not a lot of nudity, but Parton and Reynolds, in my opinion, if you see this movie and we're going to talk about it, they didn't work together enough. They should have worked. They should have done 3 or 4 movies together, and they could because there's a lot of chemistry involved with these two. So next week, Best Little Whorehouse in Texas.
Mhm.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Thank you for everybody who made comments, and we'll see everybody next week. Bye.
Have a good evening.